I've covered a massive amount of ground on the deep dive review for the AYN Thor, but I also want to take some more time to answer some excellent questions, all left by the community post that I put up a while ago. I asked what you wanted to know, and you delivered, so let's get right into it. First up, a fantastic question from Nick D. Nick. What is the maximum amount of gacha games that you can run at once? I love this question, even though it's probably a joke. The simple practical answer is 2, one for each screen. You could absolutely have your main game on the top display, while running the second game on the bottom. The Thor is fundamentally designed for that kind of multitasking. What's really cool is AYN software has a custom volume mixer. You can control the volume for each game independently. I think that's a brilliant touch for this exact scenario. Next up, we have a question from NoFaceJ1. I saw someone say that you could set up a magnified screen region, mirroring the top screen but zoomed in on the bottom. I'd like to see if that works. I think this is a good idea, but it gets to the heart of what's really possible on a dual screen device just beyond DS and 3DS emulation. I've looked around, I couldn't find anything that would allow this. I think it's a cool feature, maybe one that AYN could add in a future OTA update. So the short answer is no, but I think it's an excellent suggestion. You can put up a magnifying option obviously, but I can't get it onto the bottom screen. The next one from Never Stop Improving really gets to the absolute core about why I made this video. They ask, are you replacing your DS or 3DS original consoles with this? Why or why not? The answer is an immediate yes for all games. This device directly solves the very problem that I laid out in my introduction to my full review on this. It replaces both the dim, low yellowed screens with breathtaking AMOLED panels, and it lets you upscale 3D games to look like modern HD remasters. This is, for my money, the best and the definitive way to play DS and 3DS libraries today. Next up is a very practical, real-world question from Zeke M. Chol about late-night gaming. The face buttons and D-pad are very quiet. I don't think you're going to have any issues with waking up anybody with these. You might have an issue with the bumpers though. These are really clicky, so much so that I'm a little self-conscious when I'm playing this in public. It's not too bad though with the ambience of a normal cafe or if you're in the lunchroom, but if you were sitting beside somebody, yeah, this might get annoying. I guess it really depends what kind of games you're playing. For me anyways, it's quiet enough in a cafe and it's not really bothered anybody at work. This next question from Solitary R hits on the critical point, the D-pad comfort. How long can you play a D-pad centric game on the Thor without your hand cramping? I guess it really depends on one key factor, the grip. Without the grip, I would say it doesn't really bother me, but you kind of need to adjust your grip down. However, with AYN's official ergonomic grip, you could play this effortlessly without any issues. I think it's definitely an essential accessory that makes a profound difference in the comfort, especially on the D-pad. Hopefully that helps you decide. Next, Nongo the Bongo asks, what's the size of the face buttons compared to other devices? I think Russ covers this really well. He has a lot more handhelds than me. Either way, looking at the size of these, they're 7.7 millimeters. Not too bad. Anything less than 7 millimeters is pretty small. So this kind of just gets a little bit over that medium point. For some context, the Switch 2 face buttons are even larger at 8.2. They're very close to the size of the face buttons on the Retroid Pocket Mini at 7.3 millimeters. Actually, the Analog Pocket's really close. These come in at 8 millimeters. So only 0.3 millimeters away from the Analog Pocket. I guess this one's the closest so far. Trim My Brick probably has the smallest buttons. Yeah, these are 6.6 millimeters. The iNeo Ace is 7.4. So I guess the two closest devices with face button size are either the iNeo Ace or the Analog Pocket. Either way, the face buttons on the Thor are excellent. I think they're a really good size balance overall, and they're nice and quiet. The next question is from I Am Frog Wizard. Can you try playing Rhythm Heaven for the Nintendo DS on it? I guess. I've never played this game before. I'm going to go ahead and set this to the 120 Hz mode because this is going to be a lot smoother. Let's practice the flick. Okay. try hitting this doll with the coin. Okay. Seems pretty responsive. Aim for the toy car. Whoa, that was fast. It's not bad. It's a good test of input latency. Seems pretty responsive, very accurate. Let's try the first level. Not sure what I'm supposed to do here. I honestly don't think this is going to cause you any issues. It hasn't really bothered me at all. The next question comes from Real Skydiver 2, and he asks about the haptic rumble. I'm happy to report that the haptics here are surprisingly good. You definitely want to set them to low or medium in the settings menu. I can easily say these are some of the best haptics that I've seen on an Android device. The only one that's better, maybe the AYN Ace. It's interesting too because you definitely feel the haptics, but you don't hear like the rumbling plastic inside. It feels like a good, solid rumble. They're not quite to the level of a Switch, but they deliver a much deeper, more solid rumble than the cheap, buzzy motors that we often see in a lot of these handhelds. I have to admit, you guys are asking some great questions. The next one comes from Vance Tamalang. He asks if it's top heavy and about the hinge durability. Personally, I don't think it's top heavy at all. It feels pretty well balanced for me. This bottom half here is kind of where a lot of the weight sits from here down, and that kind of balances out this top section. As for the hinge, I think it feels pretty robust. I did find a little bit of horizontal play. As people pointed out in my main review though, that's a feature that you actually want in a clamshell. It lets the hinge have a little bit of area to play, so it doesn't put that stress on the actual mechanism. So far the hinge has been solid, no complaints from me. I really like the 3 settings that this hinge has in particular. This first one is really good if you're watching something like a movie. I kind of call this one the cafe setting because it's really nice to catch up on my YouTube subscriptions. The next one is kind of for handheld gaming, and this angle, this is for recording YouTube videos. The only thing I've noticed about the hinge is when you're not moving it and then you kind of touch it, you're going to feel a little bit of play. Not much, but a little bit. I think this is a sign of a good hinge. You don't want it too stiff, you want a little bit of give. So yeah, I do think the hinge is really solid. Lukey Pookie asks if it closes too harshly. I wouldn't really say harshly, I'm pretty careful with it. It does kind of close once you reach about here. The hinge is pretty stiff. It'll even hold it all the way down to here. I have accidentally closed it from about here, kind of slammed shut. I thought maybe it would have done something to the glass. You have these 2 rubber stoppers here for a reason. That means that if you accidentally slam it down like I did that one time, it's going to protect the glass. So yeah, I think the hinge, and if you close it too quickly, you'll be okay. I wouldn't make a habit out of it, but if you accidentally do that, you should be fine. Xylo69 asks if I can compare it to the Retroid Pocket Flip. I would, but I don't have a Retroid Pocket Flip. They feel very similar from what I remember. The biggest difference is feel. The Thor feels way more solid and robust. It has a much higher density compared to the Flip 2 and the original Flip. Danny1 Chalice 11 asks about HDR, and yes, it absolutely works, and it looks stunning. You can go up to 4K HDR in YouTube, but you won't be able to get that in streaming apps, as I covered in my main review. The combination of an AMOLED panel with perfect blacks and high peak brightness makes HDR content pop. I have no idea if this is the same panel that we're going to see in the Odin 3, but if it is, we're in for a real treat. AYN is getting really good at selecting high quality, solid panels. The next question comes from our very own Ryan Retro, and he asks about the triggers and the shoulder buttons. The bumpers are very clicky, however, they're really responsive. The analog L2 and R2 triggers are kind of a deliberate trade-off. They're great for emulating systems like GameCube. As I talked about in my review though, they do stick out, and they make it slightly harder to pocket than the original hardware. One thing I forgot to cover in my review though, it's kind of interesting. I kind of wish the plastic on the tops of these triggers kind of went around the corner. When you play this, you kind of have to position your hand further forward to sit this on the flat part. If you play with your hands further down, you are going to feel that corner. It's not too bad, but it is something that you will feel. I've just kind of gotten used to adjusting my hand. It hasn't really bothered me. Solid triggers, but not the best I've seen. They do kind of feel similar to the Retroid Pocket Mini. This one is slightly rounded, but you do kind of feel that edge. In fact, some of the best triggers that I've ever used, even the AYN Ace, they also have a very similar design. The edge kind of sticks out. However, this one does kind of round over the corner a little bit, so these are slightly more comfortable. In fact, we don't really see any improvements until you get to an x86 handheld. This one has much larger triggers with a huge surface area for your finger. This is really the next step up. Solid triggers on the Thor, but they can't match an x86 handheld. Any deal breakers? Yes, there are a few potential ones. If you're a retro purist, the D-pad placement might bother you. It hasn't bothered me, as the systems I want to play on this specifically are DS and 3DS. Even some Android games that focus heavily on D-pad for movement, like Skull the Hero Slayer, aren't that bad. If you're able to make compromises and learn how to kind of adjust your grip, this probably won't bother you. But if you're used to much larger handhelds like the AYN Portal, then the D-pad might kind of be a trade-off. As I also talked about in my review, not all the software is going to run perfect yet. Azahar in particular is just kind of stuttery. This is why I opted to use Citra MMJ. We are seeing the software updates come in pretty regularly. In fact, the Thor itself already received 2 updates, and this fixed nearly every single one of the other issues that a lot of the other reviewers had. Another trade-off, as mentioned, is these triggers. AYN has done a good job at giving us analog triggers, but also making them small enough to fit in your pocket. They do, however, still stick out ever so slightly. Not enough to bother me, but if you have really small pockets, this probably isn't the handheld for you, unless you carry it in your sling or maybe a jacket pocket. If I take any handheld out with me, I'm going to put this in one of my TomTalk slings. These kind of devices just never go in my pockets. Splingo asks if you can double Doomscroll with Instagram and YouTube shorts. Oh man, I don't know why you'd want to do that. I would advise against it, but you probably could. Silver Soleil asks about the built-in gameplay clipping software. And yes, you can record your screen. If you swipe in from the right onto AYN's software, moving over one page, there is a recording function. However, I probably wouldn't use this for something like a YouTube video. A cheap capture card will give you much better and more consistent quality. The bitrate for the recordings isn't the greatest, but it is usable. Roxas Chan asks about running texture packs. I haven't had a chance to test them out on the Thor yet specifically, but based on other Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 devices, it definitely has the power. If you plan on running texture packs, I would recommend the 12GB or 16GB models. Even in my main review for this, it showed that GameCube emulation can use 8 or 9GB of the system RAM. However, if you did go for the 8GB model, just turn on the swap file and you should be fine. I don't see texture packs being an issue for the Thor. Witty9216 asks, sticky A button? I haven't had any of the buttons stick yet. In fact, if you look really closely on the sides of these, they don't even rub on the shell. AYN has always done a really good job with their face buttons. I don't know if this was just one person that had this happen to, but for me, definitely not a problem. And finally, a really great big picture question from Grizio. Do you think we're going to see more dual screen devices at similar price points? Or is this more of a fad that'll die off as quickly as it started? I guess that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But I can tell you that the entire premise of my full review was based on the personal search for this kind of device. As mentioned, I didn't want my old 3DS back. I wanted what that hardware represented. a premium portable dual screen experience, but built with modern tech. For years, that device didn't exist. And then all of a sudden, we get this. From everything that I played on this so far, I can tell you pretty confidently that this is exactly the device that I was looking for. So I don't know if it's a fad, but I know that there's a demand for it because I was part of that demand. And now AYN has proven that it can be done. I'm extremely optimistic that this is not the last we'll see of this form factor. And that's a wrap up on the Q&A. Huge thank you to everyone who submitted a question. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, it just didn't make the cut in time. It's fantastic to see this level of engagement, and it really helps make these reviews as thorough as possible. As always guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.